What's up, guys? You're listening to a January 25th edition of the SplashTag podcast. It is about 12:50 January a.m. 20 on the 25th. So it is now the year of the rat. Happy Chinese New Year, and to all who celebrate or recognize the Lunar New Year. I am recording at this kind of late hour, partially because I wanted to get my Big 12 SEC predictions in. But on top of that, I I've been chilling a lot, and there's a lot that I want to talk about, and I really enjoyed that last late night podcast I did where I was watching that Arizona Pepperdine game. So anyhow, so two quick things. The first is I know I've already said it twice, but one bit of feedback I got on one of my episodes was that I say too much as a filler, as many people do. I will not run away from this. I will acknowledge it and say maybe I will try to get better at that. And one way is to just be more confident in my words and also speak a little bit slower, because when I am talking quickly and I'm saying a lot, I feel like that is an easy chance for me to go to a filler word when I don't have something immediately ready to say. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I revamped the SplashTag podcast in 2019, and it was actually on January 25th, 2019 where I did that. So in some ways, this is like a year anniversary. Basically, I've been doing this for a year, and I've really enjoyed it. I recognize that at the moment, this is not some podcast that has a crazy audience in terms of numbers, but I enjoy doing this so much, and I really do appreciate everyone that has listened and supported the podcast in any way, shape, or form, whether that's a guest, just smashing the like button, subscribing, or even just listening. I really do appreciate it. So with that going forward, I am honestly getting a little tired, but I do want to hit on a couple quick things. The first, I'm actually going to do some quick TV hits and I'm going to do some quick hits, including TV, basketball, and primarily the Big 12 SEC Challenge, as well as the new news of Kahlil Whitney deciding to transfer from Kentucky. There we go again. Shit, I'm trying not to. Now I get so rattled when I say it. But anyhow, so to begin, I just want to say a year ago today, actually, I recorded a podcast with Joe. It was our first official episode, so to speak, and we talked about the Big 12 SEC Challenge then, and so I thought maybe it could become a running tradition to predict the Big 12 SEC Challenge, or yes, just send in some quick thoughts. So before I do that, some quick hits. I think some of these topics, specifically the TV ones, I'll have a guest on later to discuss things more in depth with me. But for now, I just wanted to talk real quick about some things I've watched, some TV shows I've watched. And so I'm going to start by talking about The Witcher. Got the chance to see season 1 start to finish, and I enjoyed it. I am someone who never got around to watching all of Game of Thrones because there were just too many seasons, and so I feel like I had a little bit of a void. I didn't quite have that fantasy epic adventure genre exactly satisfied, and so it was cool for me to kind of explore that world or the world of The Witcher and see all the creatures and that fantastical but also somewhat medieval world. And it was the first time I really liked Henry Cavill in a role, which was cool because I felt like he was the right guy for that role. But what I will say is The Witcher season 1, I was genuinely entertained, but I did feel as though, and no spoilers of course, but I did feel as though the season was more so a setup for season 2, and so it leaves a very intriguing and promising season 2 out setup. But season 1 was still entertaining, but did not quite hit its potential. But that's okay. I am excited for season 2. I'm also excited for, speaking of being excited for upcoming TV, I am excited for Ozark Season 3, and sad that Mindhunter Season 3 is temporarily halted. Um, that is a whole nother conversation for another day, but Mindhunter is actually my favorite TV show that I've seen. Another TV show I've recently watched, I am currently on Season 2 of You. I am on episode 7, but I have finished Season 1 and I really enjoyed it. I believe I should have a whole separate podcast to discuss this, but I will say that show, it's a lot. It's a little twisted. It makes you think a lot about, our current day and age of social media and techno. Specifically, I'd say social media, and also it makes you think a lot about like the psychology behind relationships, not just like dating relationships, but like our relationships with people and how we connect and have interest in people. So definitely can recommend you, though it is obviously a little twisted and whatnot. I definitely have really enjoyed that show, and I am very excited to watch the rest of season 2. So those are some of my quick TV hits. Then I wanted to quickly talk about the NBA All-Star starters. Um, shit. Okay, so NBA All-Stars. I've seen a lot of outrage that Jimmy Butler wasn't one of the starters. I absolutely can understand why people feel that way. In fact, if I had to pick the starters, I would probably pick Jimmy Butler. But that said, I will say, as someone who was pro Trey Young heading into the draft, even I am shocked. Not even that the way. Let me frame it this way: if you told me 2 years ago that, hey, in 2 years Trey Young's going to be a starter in the NBA All Star game, averaging 29 and 8, I would be definitely shocked. And I felt like I was pretty pro Trey relative to a lot of people who had soured on him towards the end of the college season. That said, I'm definitely happy for Trey, though I do believe that this was a little bit of a weaker year in the East. You had not Beal, Wall out for the year. Oladipo hasn't played a game. Kyle Lowry missed some time, and Kyrie Irving missed a lot of time. On top of that, sorry, I will say, if you want to argue that Trey shouldn't be a starter because the Hawks have one of the worst, I think the worst record in the East, I can get behind that. But I do think that Trey Young deserved to be an All-Star. I am a little disappointed in the Hawks. Not that I thought that they would be a playoff team, but I didn't expect them to have a worse record than the Knicks. So that said, I'm curious to see what this offseason looks like for the Hawks. Beyond that, the All-Star starters in the East, I feel like we're close to a consensus. Kemba, I feel might be the least of a consensus, but at the end of the day, Boston's playing really well. And like I said, this year there were just not as many guards in the East. So I feel like the front court was basically unanimously agreed upon. Everyone knew it was going to be Giannis, who is probably going to win the MVP. Siakam, who has taken another leap, and then Joel Embiid. So that's that. Meanwhile, I feel like the West was even more of an agreement. The only wiggle room that some people might have had is taking Kawhi out for someone else. I don't know who that someone else would be, but Kawhi has missed time. If there was going to be an argument for maybe, I don't know, for Lillard to be in there instead of, and then you put Luka as a front court player, I could understand that. Although you could make the same winning and losing argument that you do with Trey Young. And on top of that, Kawhi has been incredibly good when he plays, despite having missed time. If you wanted to put Gobert there, I understand that as well. I think Gobert's had a great year. I think Gobert should have been an All-Star in 2017. Let's not kid ourselves. But all that said, the fact that there is a fan vote component, I think Gobert just didn't quite have the fan popularity to get there. So That's that. I feel like the West. Yeah, I feel like there's less controversy with the West. I obviously, there's been a little bit of controversy saying Jimmy Butler should have been a starter as opposed to Trae Young. And I really like Jimmy Butler, and the fact that the Heat are the second seed in the East, even I didn't quite see that. I don't think, and he has been that good, and he his attitude and how hard he plays and his competitive edge that really has translated perfectly with the Heat culture. And one thing I think is very misunderstood about Jimmy Butler is people act like you need to have some super intense maniacal coach yelling and screaming for him to thrive, like a Thibodeau, right? Because Jimmy definitely has that kind of brand, and Thibodeau, obviously, we know Thibodeau, but I really just think that the reason why Minnesota didn't work out was because he saw that Wiggins didn't quite have the dog and that effort in him, and that Cat sometimes was not giving it his all on the defensive end, and or sometimes more concerned with his. I'm not saying that I fully agree with this, at least not the Cat component, but um, that Cat, he felt that sometimes Cat wasn't fully buying into just winning, and I think Jimmy Butler just wants to win. He will play so hard to win, but I do think it is cool that he is doing this under a coach like Spo. It's not like Spo is this maniac running up and down and screaming and yelling. He's a very calm and composed, and by the way, one of the top coaches in the NBA. So I do think that it's cool to see that Jimmy Butler. Maybe there's a little bit of less of this crazy maniac yelling all the time type of mantra. I hope at least. Jimmy Butler has had a fantastic year. And speaking of the Heat, shout out to my guy Tyler Hero. I've been saying for a long time, Tyler Hero is going to be an NBA. I think he's going to be an NBA star, but I've been saying he's going to be a very good NBA player for quite some time. So that's that with the NBA All Star Game starters. And of course, recently there's been the news with Zion Williamson. He played 2 games. It's kind of granted. I understand there's the medical staff warning him, or not warning, giving the coaching staff a medical precaution, saying, "Hey, play him in these couple minute spurts, regardless of the outcome." And listen, I respect that. I understand that they are medical experts. I am not, and that you need to prioritize his long term health. But it does suck because I tune into these games. They're close towards the end of the game, and yet Zion doesn't get a chance to play in crunch time. And it also sucks that, and granted, I don't think this will be a problem for him, but it sucks that he's not getting the crunch time experience just yet, like, playing down to the wire. But that said, I was surprised to see him go 4 for 4 in his first NBA game, as I'm sure many people were. I would like to point out that by him going 4 for 4 in his first NBA game, this is a crazy statistic. In his first NBA game, he will have made as many threes as the previous 3 first overall picks did in their first 2 years combined. Ben Simmons hit 0 threes in his first 2 years. Markelle Fultz hit a total of 4, and DeAndre Ayton has not hit a single three in his NBA career just yet. So I find that crazy. I don't think Zion's going to be a sharpshooter from out there. But if he can get to a respectable, 34%, where people at least have to respect the shot, that's going to be a problem because then teams can't just say, go beat us from the outside as much as they would like to. So those are just some of my quick Zion thoughts. He looked, he didn't look too different from how he looked at Duke, but I think that as he continues to get more minutes under his belt and plays more, that he hopefully will be able to hit that 30 minutes per game mark. And once he hits that, I'm curious to see how he does, because one thing that we saw in summer league and whatnot was, his lack of conditioning. So I'm just curious to see how he progresses. Super excited to see him play. So let's talk some Big 12 SEC. Speaking of the SEC, like I said, I would touch upon the Kahlil Whitney news. So Kahlil Whitney transfers, or not even transfers, he's decided that he's going to leave Kentucky. He talked about how, in his statement, he talked about how the quote, business of basketball doesn't wait for anyone. And I totally respect that. Do have a couple quick thoughts. The first being, I think that it's important for everyone to note that he has not announced that he's going to transfer, nor has he declared that he's going to be go pro. He has simply just stated that that he's leaving the Kentucky basketball program. This could be a whole conversation for another day, and it probably will be. But Calipari, it feels like with some of these recruiting classes, whenever he doesn't hit and get someone who's a superstar, or he gets exposed real quick and he has a lot of holdovers, that there tends to be that these transfers and people leaving become a little more frequent. What I mean by that is, in recent years, he's had people stay multiple years, like PJ Washington, Ashton Higgins, Nick Richards, even Tyler Ulis a little while ago, Marcus Lee, Alex Poitras, and he always gets a bunch of 5-star recruits, but it seems like a lot of the 5-star recruits who kind of get exposed quickly and don't get to play a lot, it seems like some of them can get weeded out. I wouldn't say weeded out, but they can get their weaknesses can be highlighted real quickly, because Calipari, I feel as though Calipari, to play for him, you gotta buy in on the defensive end. You can't be a liability on that end. And if you're offensively, unless you're so good of an offensive player, and I feel as though a lot of people have people who may have been a little bit misscouted or a little overrated out of high school. When Cal gets them, unfortunately, they do. It's not their stock drops a little bit. So I think Kahlil Whitney's a case of that. I'm just thinking. I'm hoping that if he transfers, that he ends up in a situation where he gets to grow and develop and eventually realize his dream of playing in the NBA. If he decides to go pro, it looks like on a lot of the draft boards that I've seen that he's projected to, at best, go in the late 50s. But even then, it seems as though he played his stock dropped a lot during his time at Kentucky, and a lot of that was because it seemed as though he probably wasn't making enough. It wasn't like he was so stellar on the defensive end to make up for the fact that he looked, honestly, either lost or unable to do particularly much on the offensive end. So that's that. Do you think it's interesting that he decided now to announce it? But who knows? This college basketball season has been absolutely bonkers. Players, few players have really captured the nation's attention. I would say none have captured the casual fans' attention. There's been some that have been able to, be at the forefront of college basketball fans' minds in terms of who are the front runners for College Player of the Year. I would say it's primarily Miles Powell, Marcus Howard. I actually want to talk about Marcus Howard right after we talk about the Big 12 SEC Challenge, as well as Obi Toppin, Cassius Winston, and I feel like Lucas Garza has a better case for Big Ten Player of the Year, but you do have to respect that Cassius Winston is starting to play a lot better, and he was the front runner heading into the year, so got to give him that, as well as Peyton Pritchard. So I want to say this. I want to start by saying I do not actually, with the way this season is going, it would not surprise me if any team beat the other team in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. I wouldn't even be surprised if Tennessee beat Kansas, especially considering all the drama that Kansas is dealing with right now. But I want to just highlight some of the matches the matchups that I'm really excited for. So the first that I want to talk about is where College Game Day is going to be, and that's Kansas and Tennessee. So why am I interested in this? First off, I'm interested in seeing how Kansas responds after that scuffle, not even scuffle, the brawl at Kansas State, and the fact that there's suspensions and there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on how they move forward, and throw in the fact that Devin Dotson's been injured. I think that this could be a time where Kansas could could be vulnerable. And meanwhile, Tennessee is they lost. They also they lost Lamonte Turner for the season, but they've struggled without him. They've struggled a little bit without him, but this could be a chance for them to make a statement, potentially for a guy like Jordan Bowden to really make a statement and have a signature game, or it could be a time for just their 5-star recruit, Josiah Jordan James, or as I like to call him, Triple J. This could be a chance for him to really step up and spring up on the national radar per se, or the draft board, because so far he's really struggled on the offensive end. He hasn't been really shooting it well. He's been more so a jack of all trades kind of player that doesn't appear to be a one and done, but maybe this could be the start of him turning things around a little bit. So that's one of 3 games that I'm excited for. And ironically, the 3 games that I'm excited for are all in different little pockets. Or they all start, they're back to back to back, actually. The second game, obviously, there's no surprise, Texas Tech, Kentucky in Lubbock. This is Kentucky's last chance to get a quality, like quad one, high quality road win, especially in the non-conference, especially because the SEC is a little down. So it'll be very interesting to see how they play, considering I feel like we have seen 2 different Kentucky teams this season, and we have seen them beat Michigan State on neutral. We've seen them beat Louisville, but we've also seen them obviously lose to, I think, 3 sub-100 KenPom teams, which is a little bit alarming. But that said, they really go as far as Tyrese Maxey and Ashton Hagans take them. Nick Richards has had a good year. He's been a lot more consistent. But when Tyrese Maxey, that's my guy. He's probably my favorite player in college basketball to watch this year. But when Tyrese Maxey has a good game, I'm pretty sure they don't lose when he has a big game. I'm looking right now. Of all of his highest, the 3 times he scored over 20 points, they have won. Granted, he did play decently well in the loss to Utah. He was not particularly efficient in their loss to Ohio State was doing really well at the time, so I won't even hold that against him. But he was efficient, but didn't take a whole lot of shots against South Carolina. And then against Evansville, he had 15 points, but okay, maybe I should take that back. He hasn't been awful in their losses, but that said, I really do feel like the Tyrese. I'll put it this way: when Kentucky has looked at their peak, it has been when Tyrese Maxey is at his peak. I feel as though Ashton Hagans, honestly, who might be, I don't know if he's the best point guard in college basketball. There's an argument that you could make for him being the best point guard in college basketball, but I do feel like Ashton Hagans has been pretty consistent. Like he gets north of 5 assists and also gets double-digit points usually. He's been playing better on the offensive end recently, despite that he did seem to have an injury. And I think it was an ankle injury. So really curious to see how they do against Texas Tech. Texas Tech has bounced back a little bit from their skid, I think, in November. Jamias Ramsey, curious to see how he does against big-time guards like Ashton Hagans, Emmanuel Quickley, and Tyrese Maxey. And speaking of Emmanuel Quickley has been heading into the year. They were at the beginning of the year they were running they were running him off screens the way they used to do for like guys like Malik Monk, Tyler Hero, and I thought, oh, is this going to work? But recently, he has been absolutely killing it. I think last year and early in the season, I would watch him and I would think, he's not exactly the most efficient I would like to see him be more efficient if he's not going to distribute the ball well. But he's been on an absolute tear. He's been shooting it incredibly well, and his free throw shooting has been very consistent throughout the year. And so that, I don't know, maybe he might be able to play himself into getting drafted, considering that he's shooting about 40 from the field and 3-point range, and 92% from the free throw line. So I'm really curious to see how Jahmias Ramsey does against the three-headed Kentucky guard monster of Kentucky guards, so to speak. But that said, Texas Tech is a small team, as in they don't have a lot of height and bulk down low, and they're about. I do wonder if Nick Richards, because he's just taller and a little more athletic than Texas Tech's bigs, I wonder if he's going to just have his way. But excited to watch that. I'm surprised that College Game Day didn't choose to go there. Then at 8 p.m., the last game, there's Baylor versus Florida, number 1 in the country right now, Baylor. One of the teams I was buying heading into the year, and one of the teams that has been fairly consistent, and I have had decent amount of faith in, despite all the craziness this year. So Baylor at Florida is very interesting because it's at Florida, and Florida was one of those teams that was a very trendy Final Four, top 10 team heading into the year. A lot of that was because of their addition of Kerry Blackshear, who was the last major big-time transfer on the transfer portal last year. But they've underwhelmed a little bit to start the year. I mean, they started off the year pretty badly with their losses they lost to Florida State at home, lost at UConn, and then they also lost. They essentially were not really able to get any signature wins in the non-conference. So this is their last chance. But on top of that, they've been a little bit of disappointment, and I feel like given the way this college season has gone, this is setting up for Florida to beat Baylor, and then another number 1 goes down and people would start wondering, hey, is Florida figuring it out? But that said, I got faith in Baylor. I'm curious to see how this game goes. So those are the 3 games I'm really excited for. I really like the Big 12 SEC Challenge because it gives us one last good non-conference bash, because obviously with conference play you get to see a lot of these teams play each other, and so but obviously the NCAA tournament you generally don't play teams in the conference. So I always like to see. I love watching non-conference games for that reason, and because the Big 12 SEC Challenge is the last high major versus high major. It's the last non-conference slate, I believe, but on top of that, it's high major versus high major, so I always think it's really cool, and I hope that they don't get rid of it anytime soon. I'm gonna wrap this. I think I'll try to wrap things up. Or actually, I think I can hit on all the topics I want to talk about. So, real quick, I am somewhat fresh off of watching I watched like the last 8 minutes of regulation and then the overtime for Marquette and Butler. And a couple of just thoughts. Kamar Baldwin really went off towards the end of the game. And I have never seen, it's been a while since I've seen a guy take so many mid-range step backs and miss what felt like literally none. I saw him miss one time, but Kamar Baldwin was great. Marcus Howard actually got really cold down the stretch, and here's the thing. Marcus Howard's percentages are not bad by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they're actually pretty good, all things considered. 42% and 40 from the field, and 3% from three. Better than last year. He's playing 3 fewer minutes than last year, and yet he's averaging 28 points a game. Now, today, towards the end of the game and in overtime, he really got cold. And I feel like Marcus Howard, I feel as though whenever I watch him, it's either he always has streaks. I feel like it's not he makes one, he misses one, he makes one, he misses one. It's always got to be miss 4 in a row or hit 6 in a row, that type of thing. But that said, heading into the year, a lot of people were down on Marquette because they lost the Hauser brothers to transfer. But I thought that they were adding in some decent transfers that could help. And today, I do feel a little bit validated by that. Despite that they lost, I've been fairly impressed by the play. I feel as though there's been a lot of internal development, and there's been a lot of internal improvement from guys. For instance, Sakar, Anem, as well as Theo John. I really liked what I saw from them today. Marcus Howard's obviously gotten a little better, or I wouldn't say a little better. He's gotten better, but he has to do more now. I saw obviously teams are going to try to double him, trap him, get the ball out of his hands, and say, "Hey, someone else beat us other than Marcus Howard." It's what Butler was doing down the stretch, and I also really liked what I saw from Kobe McEwen. But that said, this team sometimes it does feel like Marcus Howard. It's as if when Marcus Howard, this team will go as far as Marcus Howard will take them. But that said, it was good to see that he had other perimeter firepower and help. So, some other observations from that game. Once upon a time I said that I felt like the draft comparison when I was before the draft last year, I felt as though a good NBA comparison for Carson Edwards was Jason Terry. Now that I think about it, I think that comparison might be better for Marcus Howard. He's a smaller player, smaller guard, not exactly the most. He doesn't get his buckets through explosiveness, but he is so crafty and able to shoot he is so good at shooting and able to craft his own shots off the dribble and hit them at a good clip from the mid range, from three. I get a little bit of Jason Terry vibes. Jason Terry was not a true point guard, but he was also a lot of times considered to be kind of slight in frame and small to play to be a quote unquote shooting guard. Like it wasn't like Jason Terry. Jason Terry was like a Dwayne Wade or a Kobe, but that said, he was a very effective scorer. And granted, I'm not saying that I think Marcus Howard is going to be Jason Terry in the NBA, but I do wonder if a guy can shoot it that well and create his own shot and create his own offense for himself like that. Does he have a spot in the NBA? I personally think so. It's been cool to see. It was also really cool to see at the end of regulation. Um, First off, Marquette Butler was a great game. Definitely one of the more entertaining and like well played games that I've seen this year. But it was kind of cool. I remember seeing this with Buddy Hield when he was in college. Ironically, also a prolific scorer and shooter who stayed 4 years. But Buddy Hield, because he was such a threat from the outside, I remember seeing time in crunch time where the other team would try to they would try to face guard Buddy, have a second defender try to keep the ball out of his hands. And I remember watching, I think it was LSU Oklahoma, where they were tied or maybe down, and Buddy Hield was a decoy. And I think it's cool to see that Marcus Howard is so good of a shooter on that. He's in that Buddy Hield stratosphere, but he did a similar thing today for Kobe McEwen when he hit that game tying shot to send the game to overtime. So those are just some observations I had. But heading into the year, I think that Buddy Hield and Marcus Howard are different players in terms of how they project and their style. But heading into the year, I did think that Marcus Howard could have a Buddy Hield-like senior season, except that his team probably wouldn't be as good as that Oklahoma team. That Oklahoma team was number one in the country at one point, a 2 seed, made it to the Final Four. But that said, I think Marcus Howard, if you look at how he's played, he's had a Player of the Year caliber season. Granted, the Player of the Year usually goes to a top 4 seed. We got to see if Marquette can get there. But Marquette has been competitive in most of their games or most of their losses, and they don't have any bad losses that alarm me, but they also haven't had too many signature wins that make you say, okay, this is a team that I think could be like a top 4 seed. But that said, I've enjoyed watching Marcus Howard this year. For the bigger picture, I want to talk about just college basketball, where we're at. I want to point out it is so weird that I wonder when the last time this happened, where the top 4 in the AP poll are all teams that are like quote unquote west. I know that Kansas isn't quite in the west, but let's just say west of the Mississippi. You got Baylor, Gonzaga, San Diego State, and Kansas. That's very uncommon. It's weird for there not to be a single East Coast based team in the top four. Then at 5, you got Florida State, who I'm actually going to see in person on Tuesday when they play in Charlottesville. So I'm very, very excited for that. But so San Diego State, let's start with San Diego State. In this college basketball season of parity and no juggernauts, no really dominant teams, San Diego State has surprised me. They have gone about their business and just beaten teams, and the hardest part of their schedule is behind them. By the way, I got to see Malachi Flynn this past summer. Didn't know who he was. Googled him, saw that he was played at Wazoo and transferred. It's been cool to see him really thrive. Wish I could say that I saw this from him, but I didn't get to see him play too much this past summer while in Seattle. But he's been very good shooting it well from deep and being a little more efficient than he was while he was at Wazoo. So that's cool. But so San Diego State, they're currently 20-0. The hardest part of their schedule is behind them. They still have a couple road games at Nevada and New Mexico and Boise State, which are none of those teams project as great teams, but at the end of the day, road games in conference. Boise State's been decent. So they have that, and then they have the home game against Utah State. But Utah State, though they obviously have Kita and then blanking on the guy's name. What is his name? Utah State. Is it what is it? Sam Merrill. Sorry, Sam Merrill. But they've struggled a little bit, and they were ranked heading into the season. They looked good for a couple weeks, but now it looks like they're definitely not. They probably need to win the Mountain West tournament to get into the tournament. And so the big question becomes, can San Diego State run the table heading into the NCAA tournament? I don't think that's a crazy proposition, given, like I said, they've already won 20 in a row. They just need to win 9 more regular conference games and then win the Mountain West tournament. The Mountain West doesn't have a team better than 64th and KenPom. But that said, given how this season has gone, I think your money is safer if you bet on them losing a game. But all that said, could I see them going undefeated? Absolutely. I'm rooting for them to go undefeated, and here's why. Is it crazy to think that how crazy would it be if we had an undefeated team heading into the tournament this year? And it's a team like San Diego State, who missed the tournament last year, is not a traditional powerhouse. And if I'm being honest, if they went undefeated, while I wouldn't bet on this, it wouldn't surprise me if they lost in the first round having gone undefeated. And that would just make for all sorts of crazy drama. But that said, I always love seeing an undefeated team heading into the tournament. And so I'm rooting for San Diego State to run the table. And by the way, I'm not rooting for them to lose to a 16 seed, but I'm just saying, given how this year I don't really see any juggernauts, I think I mentioned the 16 seed to say this. First off, I think a 16 seed has a good chance of winning this year, but on top of that, I say that to say, if San Diego State goes undefeated, when I think of I've only seen 2 undefeated teams heading into the tournament in my lifetime, and that is Wichita State in 2013-14 and Kentucky in 2014-15. That 14-15 Kentucky team was probably the best college team I've ever seen. So obviously San Diego State, if they run the table, comes nowhere near that. But I even think that this San Diego State team is nowhere near that Wichita State team. So this is not, yes, I think they have a good chance to go undefeated, but if they do, I would say that they would not feel like a traditional undefeated juggernaut, invincible, can't be beat type of feel. Even that St. Joseph's team with Jameer Nelson and Delonte West. And by the way, hopefully, Delonte West. I guess praying for Delonte West, hoping that he gets the help that he needs. It was really shocking to see that news, and definitely sad to see. Anyhow, can San Diego State go undefeated? I wouldn't bet on it, but I do think that there's like a 5%, 10% chance even. I'd say 10. I'd say there's a decent chance. And at this point, I'm rooting for that narrative to be a thing heading into the NCAA tournament. Another quick note I wanted to point out. One bracketology thing that I'm willing to one bracketology point that I'm willing to take to the bank is that I am penciling Gonzaga into the second weekend of the tournament, regardless of who is the 8th seed, and maybe this won't, or sorry, regardless of who they have to play. And maybe that won't age well, but here's why. I always enjoyed looking at locations and seeing like, okay, which teams are playing, which team is going to be sent where if they get this seed and whatnot. And there are literally games in Spokane, Washington that first weekend. And under NCAA rules, you cannot, if you are the host, you are hosting NCAA tournament games, you cannot play in that site. But here's the catch. In Spokane, they are being held at it's being held at the Spokane Veterans Memorial Arena, and technically the host is the University of Idaho. That I know sounds crazy. Doesn't really make sense considering Spokane is Washington, Idaho is another state. But anyhow, it's another debate for another day. Gonzaga does not actually play their games there. Gonzaga only plays in the McCarthy Athletic Center, so they're technically not the host. And given the fact that Gonzaga is probably going to be a 1 seed unless they lose two or more West Coast Conference games, they're probably locked into a 1 seed. And even if they don't get a 1 seed, okay, I think they're getting a 1 seed, but even if they don't, they're going to probably be better than most teams and be able to lock in a Spokane first weekend game. So given that they're basically going to be playing home games for the first and second round, let's say they are a 1 seed, even if they have a team that's like, seems like talent-wise could match them as an 8 or a 9 seed, I just think that you take a team that's experienced like Gonzaga, coached by Mark Few, getting home court advantage in the NCAA tournament. I have Gonzaga penciled. Because of that, I don't see Gonzaga losing in the first weekend, and I have them penciled into making the Sweet 16. And if that's the case, that would make it 6 straight years where Mark Few has hit the second weekend. So he has really got that thing rolling consistently at Gonzaga. So that was my last thought or thing I wanted to touch upon. So with that, it's now, I think I'm going to wrap up the episode there. So thank you for listening. For those of you that have listened throughout this last year, like I said, really appreciate it. And it would, if you haven't done so already, please rate, hopefully give a good review, but hopefully rate and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. And I really appreciate you listening, and I will catch you soon.